But I want to begin by talking about who was Machiavelli. How do we read the Prince? Machiavelli was a Florentine, and to know that is to know virtually everything you need to know about him. I'm exaggerating, but I do so to make a point. Florence was a republic. It was a city-state, and Machiavelli spent a good deal of his adult life in the service of the republic. Living in Florence, the center of the Renaissance, at the height of the Renaissance, Machiavelli wished to do for politics what his contemporaries like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo had done for art and sculpture. In other words, he hoped to revive in some way the spirit of the ancients, of antiquity, but to modify it in the lights of his own experience. And as he puts it in the dedication of his most famous book, he writes that this book, The Prince, is a product of long experience with modern things and a continuous reading of the ancient ones. In Machiavelli, we have what we have come to call modernity, given its first and most powerful expression. But Machiavelli was not an ordinary Florentine. He grew up under the rule of the Medici, that is to say, the first family of Florence, and lived to see them deposed by a Dominican friar by the name of Savonarola. Savonarola attempted to impose a kind of theocracy in Florence, a sort of Christian republic of virtue, but the Florentines, being what they were, rejected this idea, and the rule of Savonarola was short-lived. And in its place, a republic was reestablished, where Machiavelli occupied the office of secretary to the Second Chancery, a kind of diplomatic post, which he held for 14 years, from 1498 to 1512. And after the fall of the Republic and the return of the Medici to princely rule there, Machiavelli was exiled from the city, from politics, to a small estate that he owned on the outskirts of the city. And you can visit it today. And it was here, from a place of political exile, that he wrote his major works, The Prince, the Discourses on Livy, and The Art of War. And it was from here also that he wrote voluminous letters to friends seeking knowledge about politics. Machiavelli was a kind of political junkie, you could say, and happenings in Italy and elsewhere. And in one of these letters, a famous letter to his friend, a man named Francesco Vittori, he describes how he came to write his most famous book. And I want to read a passage from that letter. And it is also, I should say, on the basis of this letter, which is why I ask people from time to time to remove their caps in the classroom, from the house of study. This is the way Machiavelli approached study. When evening comes, he writes, I return to my house and go to my study. At the door, I take off my clothes of the day covered with muck and dirt, and I put on my regal and courtly garments. And decently reclothed, I enter the ancient courts of ancient men, where received by them lovingly, I feed on the food that alone is mine and that I was born for. There I am not ashamed to speak with them and to ask them the reasons for their actions, and they in their humanity reply to me. And for the space of 4 hours every night I feel no boredom, I forget every pain, I do not fear poverty, and death does not frighten me. I deliver myself entirely unto them. And because Dante says that to have understood without retention does not make knowledge, I have noted what capital I have made from their conversations and have composed a little work on principalities, where I delve as deeply as I can into reflections on this subject, debating what a principality is, of what kinds they are, how they are acquired, how they are maintained, and why they are lost. So there Machiavelli gives us a sense of the seriousness with which he approached his subject, how he studied, and what it was he came to write. Let me just say from the beginning, The Prince is a deceptive book. What else would we expect from the name of a man that has become synonymous with deception? It is a work, The Prince, that everybody has heard of, perhaps has some preconception about. I was checking the web yesterday and I found a new book about Machiavelli, which none of these ever fail to surprise me. This one is called The Suit, a Machiavellian guide to men's fashion. Check it out. Who knows? Machiavelli's name is everywhere. It is applied to everything from corporate executives now to men's fashion. Everybody knows or thinks they know what his work is about. His name, again, is synonymous with deception, treachery, cunning, deceit. Just look at the cover of your book. Look at his face. Look at his smile. Really more of a smirk. He seems to be saying, I know something you don't know. The difficulty with reading Machiavelli today is that we all think we already know what he knows, and that is false. Machiavelli was a revolutionary. In the preface to his largest book, The Discourses on Livy, he compares himself to Christopher Columbus for his discovery of what he calls new modes and orders. What Columbus had done for geography, Machiavelli claims he will do for politics. That is to say, discover an entirely new continent, a new world, so to speak, the new world of Machiavelli. Machiavelli's new world, his new modes and orders, will require clearly a displacement of the earlier one, of the previous one. When Machiavelli wrote, of course, the dominant form of political organization was the empire, or to speak more precisely, the Christian empire. The Holy Roman Empire, as it was known in the time of Machiavelli, was the successor to the ancient Roman state, the older Roman Empire. Both of these empires had aspired to a kind of universality. And this universality was given expression in Dante's famous treatise, De Monarchia, of monarchy, that set out a model for a universal Christian state based on the unity and oneness of the human race under a Christian ruler. Machiavelli rejected this idea of the empire and harked back instead to the model of Republican Rome. And there is much in his writing that recalls the sort of extraordinary virtues and capacities of the citizens of the ancient Republican city-state. But you might say, just as Machiavelli broke with the dominant model of Christian universalism, so too did he reject the ancient model of the small, autonomous Republican state. He makes this clear in a famous passage at the beginning of chapter 15 of The Prince, and I just want to read that passage as well. Here Machiavelli says, I depart from the orders of others. I depart from their modes, he says. But since it is my intent to write something useful to whoever understands it, it has appeared to me more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of things than to the imagination of it. And many have imagined, one thinks here of Plato perhaps, but also to Christianity, many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth. For it is far from how one lives to how one should live, that he who lets go of what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. In other words, no Platonic cities in speech, no Augustinian cities of God. We will only look, he says, to the effectual truth of things, the effectual truth of the matter, not the imagination of it or the utopia of it. That passage is often taken to be the beginning of chapter 15, the essence of Machiavellian realism, a kind of realpolitik, as it were, his appeal from the ought to the is, to take one's bearings again from the effectual truth of things. This seems to be in many ways the essence of his teaching. To be sure, Machiavelli focuses on key aspects of political reality, which are often ignored by thinkers like Plato and Aristotle. Murders, conspiracies, coup d'etat, these are the kinds of political phenomena he is interested. He seems to be more interested in the evils that human beings do than the goods to which they aspire. You might even say that Machiavelli takes delight in demonstrating, much to our chagrin, the space between our lofty intentions and the actual consequences of our deeds. And yet, it would seem to me there is more to Machiavelli than the term realism connotes, although that is certainly important. In this passage, Machiavelli announces his break, indeed his repudiation of all those who have come before, all those who have come before. He both replaces and yet reconfigures, according to his own lights, elements from both the Christian empire and the Roman Republic to create a new form of political organization, distinctly his own, what we might call today the modern state. Machiavelli is the founder, the discoverer, the inventor of the modern state. This modern secular sovereign state was refined and developed in the decades and centuries after Machiavelli, in the writing of Hobbes, of Locke, of Rousseau, to say nothing of contemporary 20th century writers from both the right and the left, Max Weber, Carl Schmitt, to a man, an Italian philosopher named Antonio Gramsci, who was the author of a book, interestingly, called The Modern Prince, based on Machiavelli himself. Machiavelli's state itself has universalist ambitions in many ways, much like its Christian and Roman predecessors. But this is a state, he believes, that has now been liberated, or at least emancipated from Christian and classical conceptions of virtue. The management of affairs is left to those people who he calls princes, which, as the Machiavellian usage designates, a new kind of political founder or leader endowed with a new species of ambition, love of glory, and elements of prophetic authority that we might call charisma.